Okay. I was originally going to highlight a couple of parallels between the question that I'm going to ask and the event that it concerns, and some kind of modern day things that happen. But that makes the video several minutes long, so we're not going to do that. I'm doing my project on the Salem witch trials, specifically to what degree the witch trials impacted the colony's reliance on religion in government. The reason being, I think that if these trials were the catalyst for legal changes like the right to representation and cross examination, the right to be considered innocent until you're proven guilty, due process, the abolishment of cruel and unusual punishment, eventually, maybe the abolishment of the death penalty, and just general secularism in law, if the trials did, in fact, kind of catalyze all of those changes in law, you could make the argument that the trials were kind of a necessary event, a necessary turning point in American law and American religion, even though obviously they were very, very horrible and abhorrent event. Like I said, I was going to touch on these parallels because I think they're interesting, but I'm just going to have to wait. So some sources that I kind of want to dive into. A couple of articles, one by Emerson Baker, done for the Oxford Research Encyclopedia. It discusses how after these trials, there was kind of a general distrust in government by members of these colonies, which I think is an interesting thing to highlight, just because I feel like that's a very common notion. It's a very common thread throughout all of American history and all of American politics and religion and government. So I do think that if this was truly something that was sparked right after these trials occurred and after it kind of came to light that, hey, we messed up and we shouldn't have done this, and our government has failed us by allowing this to happen. If that's true, it's possible that these trials were, in fact, more of a turning point than I even realized when I initially posed this question. Because if that's kind of where that distrust in government started, then that makes everything different. I mean, that's even prior to the American Revolution and all that. I mean, if this was like truly the starting point, I think that would be really interesting. So I definitely want to look into that some more. The article by Jeff Wallenfeld was for the Encyclopedia Britannica. It talked mostly about the fact that these trials kind of brought about reasoning for the right to cross-examination, and specifically the right to legal representation, the right to have a lawyer represent you in court, rather than just having to defend yourself and fight for your life, basically. So I definitely want to utilize that some more. A couple of books that I want to definitely use, A Storm of Witchcraft, also by Emerson Baker. Mostly just talks about the history of the Salem witch trials and basically what transpired there, kind of an account of the events. But then additionally, how they kind of play into modern American government and modern American law, as well as the separation of church and state and how that kind of played a role there. And then the Grand Inquisitor's Manual by Jonathan Kirsch is another one that I want to look into some more, even just upon initially reading it and researching it. I do think that it's going to be very pertinent, very relevant. Basically, it's about not only these trials, but several other events in history where leaders would kind of utilize God and the Bible and just other religious texts, religious documents, religious figures to kind of almost force people to take certain actions or to follow certain laws in the name of God, in the name of pleasing God, or basically don't go to hell. And I think that's, as a Christian, I think that's disgusting that you would use religion or a text like that for your own personal gain. But regardless, point being, I would want to use that just because it kind of proves that this is a very common theme, it seems like, throughout history in general, but American history specifically. And it's possible that when it occurred here during these witch trials, it was more of a turning point than it had been when things like that happened in the past. And then finally, I definitely want to look at the Body of Liberties. It's a legal document from 1641. The reason that I specifically want to look more into this one is because based on the small section of it that I read, there is a specific law that talks about witchcraft. And I believe, put simply, it's thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So just very bluntly, just kill the witches, But as reasoning for this law, it lists 3 Bible verses. So approximately like a paragraph in the Bible basically justified these trials and the wrongful accusation and in some cases the wrongful murder of several innocent men and women. Did nothing wrong. So I definitely want to look into that more. Additionally, I didn't write this up here, but I also found out that apparently at the time of these trials, they did not have an official colony charter because the one that they've been using before had been basically kind of taken out of commission. It had been put on hold because these two families were feuding, and they were like, well, we'll just put that aside for a second. We don't have a charter right now. That's not important. And they had a new governor on standby, and like they could have made new laws. They could have worked on that, but they didn't. So during these trials, they basically had no laws to go off of to make sure that these trials were fair. So you had judges that were accepting speculation and specters as evidence. So not only just testimonies with zero basis in fact and zero basis in actual evidence, but also testimonies that were based on dreams that people supposedly had or spirits that they supposedly had seen, the devil that they had seen talking to their next door neighbor. And so just, I think that's very interesting that the fact that I do think that this possibly made quite a bit of a difference in our legal history and in our legal future after this event. It's ironic that at the time they had no laws. There was just no laws that were in place to kind of prevent this from happening. I think that's wild. I do really want to go over those at some point because I think they're very interesting. But so that's basically the kind of the question that I want to address. I would like to be proven right, but of course, it's possible that I'll go through all this and I'll realize that all this stuff was going to happen anyway, and it didn't really matter if a bunch of people got killed because they were accused of being witches. Eventually, we were going to get these changes that we needed anyway, maybe in a much less violent manner. But if that's the case, then, I was wrong. So, I had a lot of fun researching this. I had a lot more fun than I thought I was going to, and I am actually very excited to put all this together in project form. Sorry this was so long, but it's a lot shorter than the other takes that I did, believe it or not.